Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Find and Follow podcast, where we are all about helping you find and follow Jesus in your everyday life. Craig, Kyle, and Scott are here today as your co-hosting crew with a total of over 150 years life experience. But yet today's episode is all about time to grow up. So we're 150 plus years old together.
Did you do the math on that?
I did. I'm pretty sharp. I can add 3 numbers. And I didn't even give you an exact number there. That's how sharp I am. Just round it down a little bit. But anyways, it's time to grow up, Craig. I don't know if you feel that today. Kyle, time to grow up. Time to mature.
I thought growing up was optional.
It is. That is the point. I think that's what we'll get into here in Ephesians. I think that's what God's saying. I think that's what Paul is saying.
God's saying it's optional?
It is optional. The beauty of free choice, free will in life. We have the ability to choose to do things and not to do things. And, Craig, this is a great segue. Do you want to talk about parenting right now? Because it works so great in the parenting world. God gave us all the gift of self-control, not control your sibling. That's a common phrase. Hey, let's put our energies and efforts into controlling ourselves. God gave us self-control. You get so much energy going towards other people in your life, trying to control them to get them to do the things that you're not even doing. I don't know if that's just a child, high school, middle school thing, or if that's a human thing. Kyle shook his head like it might be.
Yeah, it's 100% human.
Yeah, 100%.
How often do we try to do somebody else's part or try to do it for them or complain about?
Yeah.
It's highlighted in children because we whine about it maybe more and we tattle and Dad, come to you, but yeah, it's a human problem. It's an adult problem, birth to death problem.
Right, and so we're gonna jump into it. I don't know if this is too thin ice to skate across in the opening of the podcast, but as you think about yourself in maturing, growing up, are there things that are for your life? Let's just start right out you guys weren't prepared or open for this, but like, what is something that's maybe, hey, this is an area I'm maturing in? Before we start talking about what our listeners may need to do, one good rule of communication is to go first, right? So what's something maybe that is like, oh, okay, God invites us to be childlike all the time in our faith, to have that when a kid hears something, they believe it 100%, right? And oh man, we gotta tell that story. So Jesus invites us to be childlike in that way, but not childish in the sense of not growing and maturing in our faith. And sometimes that's a trap for all of us, where we grow up physically and we mature physically, but then we haven't matured in our faith, and so we have a childish faith. And our childish faith runs into adult problems, and it trips us up, and then we drift away from God. And then we see that all the time with people in their 30s or 40s or 50s, and on outward appearances, they look like, wow, you've come to church or you profess faith and you've done. What happened? Why did you drift away? What went on? And they hit some serious stuff in life, disappointments, heartbreaks, just the brokenness of our world, and boom, they're drifting away from God. And it's sometimes, it's always heartbreaking, but it's confusing. And I think it's their faith didn't mature as they grew. And so before we get jumping into too many other folks and what they need to do, you guys look a little shell-shocked here if people aren't watching on the video of like, what Scott hit us with the hard question. Where's the banter, the casual banter of like the week?
I think one of the points of maturity is allowing others to go first. So, Kyle?
Yeah. Scott, Scott, as he's setting it up, he goes, as a communicating, you should go first, but I'm not going to go first. I'm going to ask you guys to go first.
Well, it's a we. We are going to go first.
Oh, we are going to go. But you asked us, and us are not you. So the we. And
on behalf of the listeners, we are going to take a turn first.
I don't know. I feel like I'm always constantly, and maybe I at sometimes on the humility pendulum would swing too far into the like, dude, I'm not worth anything. Like, don't look at me. So I'm constantly going like, dude, I'm not even close to having arrived. I don't really think I've ever struggled with that. Like, look at me. I'm the greatest of all time. Some people, this puffed up.
The ego side.
Yeah, the ego side.
There's two wrong ways when we talk about humility. There's the ego, and they're both insecurity showed up different ways. So you're saying not so much on the bravado ego, big time. Although there's been a few occasions on a golf course, make a long putt, that side does show up.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm not saying I don't have it. I mean, I'm a competitor. I love to win. I hate to lose.
Especially if there's like $20 on the
Yeah.
line. But you're saying on the other side of
Yeah,
that.
I mean, again, in a lot of my life, even in this last season, taking over the lead pastor role, I told a lot of people, like, man, I had some, imposter syndrome. Like, who the heck am I? Like, I don't, that kind of stuff. And so, as
Did you actually clarify that? Are you an imposter? Is there something we need to know?
maybe I'm thinking sometimes I'm like, how did I trick everybody here? And so for me, the reason I bring all that up, guys, because I'm constantly going, God, like how do I need to learn? And then again, this last season, one of it, job change, but then having a baby, right? That'll just humble you super quick. Like, I don't know anything about life, and I'm in charge of a human, and so just maturing in when you first say it, I think a lot of just interpersonal stuff. My relationship with my wife, constantly learning and maturing in how to lead her, how to love her, how to care for her, how to serve her. How to communicate with her, how to communicate with the 2-year-old. And my daughter is so perceptive right now, but trying to learn, like, with discipline. Like, why are we disciplining you? Why are we putting you in timeout? Why are you getting a spanking? Because, you're not listening and all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of that interpersonal, man, how am I loving people well and communicating? I got a lot of maturing to do in that.
In the context of maturity here in this passage that we're looking at in Ephesians, part of the maturing process is having deep roots, being your life being founded and stable on something solid and unchanging. And of course, that's Christ. But it's partly getting that balance between some false humility or some pride, those two extremes you talked about, Scott. But it's a lot more than just that. It's coming to a place where I have a faith that is settled. I know, what Paul put it this way, he says, I know in whom I have believed that he is able to keep that which I've entrusted unto him until that day. It was a settled issue for Paul, and that's part of the maturing process.
What about for Craig? You did great there. You answered a question, but didn't answer the question. That was a very good point.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott.
Well, Kyle went first, and then I thought you were going to go.
I did go.
Still not you.
It's your
Go.
turn, Scott.
Oh, is it my turn? I would say for me, I'm always feeling the need to grow up and mature in my deep desire to spend intimate time with the Lord. And so in my day activities, so a lot of time in prayer, and just when I have option to go, okay, what do I do with my time? I just feel like I should be farther along in my heart. And so there's times and moments for sure where it feels more vibrant and real and passionate to okay, I've always loved God, but the desire to spend intimate time with him and just be with him. And so I feel like that's an area of my heart and my life that needs to mature, needs to continue to grow. And maybe it's because as you go through life, you just face more and more stuff that is just hard. And so much the reality of there's so much that's not in my control. And whether it's with kids, and I got kids, one's 18 and going to leave the house eventually someday, like a senior in high school reality.
Kids that aren't kids anymore? That's crazy.
And I've never been in control of them, but it's easier when they're 2. You're like, oh, you're throwing a fit. I literally will pick you up and I will take you to a different spot. It doesn't work well when they're 18 or 7. I mean, you're like, I can physically make you do some things and sit in a timeout chair, whatever, right? So the perception of control. Anyways, and then just hard stuff. And we went to a funeral, memorial celebration of life this last week, and dealing with loss of family and grieving and hard things relationally. And just man, an area that needs to mature is just my continued connectedness and desire to be with Jesus. And at the same time, I love Jesus. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't feel like I love Jesus. I just want that area to continue to grow and not lag behind and be immature in that area. Because Paul's saying, and we're right in the middle of Ephesians 4, and if you weren't with us on the last episode, Ephesians 4 is kind of the area in Paul's letter where he transitions from some real deep understanding of theology and the why behind the what. And then chapter 4 is like real clear, like the what. And so he's saying, hey, this is the reason why is continue to grow up. Verse 14, then you will no longer be infants, or you'll no longer be immature like children who are tossed and blown back and forth by every wind of new teaching, every trend that hits social media, every new pop culture, pop psychology headline thingy that hits the mainstream and gets in our culture so fast nowadays. So fast. There's not this, it takes 2 years to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. It takes 2 seconds for it to hit everybody's device. In it for small town, big town, inner city, outside city, suburbans, everybody gets it, cross countries. Then we won't be influenced with lies from the enemy who thinks you're an imposter, that you're not mature enough, you're not good enough, or whatever it is, we'll know the truth. And so that everybody is together. I love this where he's talking about the whole body. We talked about different gifts that God gives to the church, but it's the whole body growing together, more and more like Christ, together in love, speaking the truth in love. There's a unity as every unique part does their job to help the other parts, doing its own special work so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. Like that's the objective. And in that, we're pleasing the Lord.
And Paul's using some really cool words and some cool imagery with the maturity, right? And it's easy to see in the English language, obviously, with growth and maturity, because even that word maturity, right? It speaks of being like full grown, speaks of reaching, your potential and all that kind of stuff. But in the Greek, it even holds that even more like vivid imagery of a man who's fully grown, who's strong. And then he's using these same, imagery with our body as the church and the growth. So all of these things, he's talking about this, and he picking up right where we left off last week with this idea of unity, that it's not disconnected, it's not disjointed, it's not wonky and weird. Everything's working together in perfect harmony like a really good, strong body that's healthy and thriving and reach maturity. And that's the way he's using this beautiful imagery. That's the way the church should function. That's also the way you as individual members of the church should be relating to your Creator and your Savior and reaching this maturity of strength and security. So you're not just like wandering out there, like a little baby giraffe or something. You've seen those videos, right? Yeah. Where they're like, ah!
They're all legs.
Yeah.
And the parent is like kicking their butt in the first 5 seconds to get moving. Yeah. They have to learn to get up and run in the first few minutes. Otherwise, they're lion bait.
And so Paul's like, that's what you look like at the beginning. But like, you need to be this big, strong, running down the fields like that in relationship with Jesus. And as the church grows, like, so I just love that imagery that he's using because it's relatable. Obviously, every one of us has a body and gets it. And then he's like, we should strive for that type of thing spiritually as well.
So I got to tell this story, and it's cute and fun, okay? That's the point of it. I'm not trying to embarrass
you guys were doing all like, you guys had your connection moment there. You're just looking at each other, speaking, and you were laying hands.
It's one of those hilarious. So we took this family trip, the 7 of us, my 5, and then you, Craig, and Cindy, my parents. And so we went to my mom's uncle's funeral. So he was 97. It's her dad's last remaining relative. And so my mom's brother, my uncle came, and lots of other people on their side of the family, and some cousins and people we don't really connect with, don't usually see unless it's a wedding or a funeral. Or growing up, we did a little more vacationing together, camping. So whatever I have second cousins, and so we hung out quite a few different times and kind of know each other. Anyway, so we're in this whole big family situation with 4 generations, and so my kids, it was great for them just to experience all of that, meet some of the family they have only heard about or seen in pictures, and put some name and faces together, and it helped us reminisce on my grandparents, so their great grandparents, what they kind of knew, and anyways. So as we're going through, it's just so confusing. We literally, all of us said, we should get a chart. They should hand out a family tree chart at some of these functions and like, wait.
Flashcards with, Scott, and he's related to.
Pictures.
And name tags should be mandatory in a situation like that.
Yeah, when you're dealing with like second cousin's grandkid, right? You're like, wait, are you connected to Ryan or, Randy, or how are you? And we're just learning a lot of names. It's hard for us. So my kids are really struggling. Like, who now and what? And so we're walking around talking about it, and I said, "Mom's, blah blah blah, mom's relationship, right?" Well, they thought I was talking about Amy because I was talking to them. I'm like,
Yeah,
Amy's not my mom, Grammy's my mom, and they're like, "Well, you call Amy mom sometimes." I'm like, "Yeah, for your guys' benefit, because you say mom, and so three of you, anyways. Most people understand that." So I said that, and then I'm like, "No, it's Grammy. You know her, blah, blah, this is the situation." And then, Craig, you walked around the corner from somewhere, and Amy goes, "There comes your dad." I'm like, "Yeah, there's my dad. See?" And so what's his name? And Wyatt goes, "Gerald." And I look at his face like, "Oh, that's funny. That's a good joke." He's dead serious. He goes, "His name's Gerald." And I'm like, "What?" And Gerald is a nickname for Craig. Now, you tell the story. Why is Gerald a nickname?
So many, many years ago, there was a Saturday night bit where they were doing imitation of Tom Brokaw, who used to be a news broadcaster, and using his voice, and then talking about Gerald Ford, who was someone in the news at the time.
Gerald Ford died today.
There you go.
You know the bit, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So,
well, Ben listened to that, watched that, and started using that to refer to me. And I'm not quite sure why or how, but it stuck.
yeah, decades ago. So it's Gerald.
So the kid, the three of you guys called him Gerald?
No,
Ben
just
mostly.
Ben.
Oh, okay.
And it's a
And to this day, he calls me Gerald.
it's a term of endearment. It's just one of those things. Sometimes we'll occasionally, I'll say it, goofing around, whatever.
But there's another part to it.
Here's why it's part to it.
Yeah, so we have a we. And on the Wii, you create little avatars, and you give it a name and stuff. Well, I had created a Wii avatar way back and named my avatar Gerald, just for fun. Well, every time Wyatt would play the Wii, he would see Gerald. So that reinforced the idea, well, Grandpa's name is Gerald.
Like, legit, he thought your
Yep.
name was Gerald.
No, this is legit.
Legit. So it took us like 4 or 5 times going back and forth. I'm like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah, Gerald." I'm like, "No, what? Are you joking? This is funny."
Never heard anybody call him Pastor Craig.
I was like,
oh,
"You've heard
yeah,
me."
but get
So
this.
I said, "His name's Craig." He goes, "Well, I thought Craig was short for Gerald."
oh, that's
I was
awesome.
like, "What?"
I gotta love it.
Oh man! And just again, I tell that not to embarrass Wyatt. It was funny. We cleared it up. Yeah, it's like a Bob and Robert situation, like Gerald and Craig, which now is the new short version of Gerald is Craig. So we just established that. That's
Gerald.
never been done. But I only say that because that's what Paul's getting at. That's when Jesus at times would point to his followers, disciples, people wanting to be like Jesus, and say, "Hey, be like these kids." What is he saying? Does he say be ignorant about the names of God or who he is? He's like, no, but just take it at face value. When I say I am the Son of God and I've come here, I'm the only one that can forgive sins. Like you said earlier, Craig, firm foundation. Stand on that. That's settled. That's solid. The older we get, the more cynical we get, or the more skeptical we can get. But like he wants our roots to grow deep on be childlike in that way. Now, don't be childish and don't think I'm Craig or Gerald. And so for Wyatt, it was just like, it was a matter of fact. We called him Gerald. So to a certain degree, your name is Gerald. It's a nickname. Like there's a validity to that where you go, is Kyle's name Kyle or Carl? Well, if you ask Kenny, he would probably say his name's Carl first.
Well, it's not on my birth certificate, so there's
to the legalese,
Yep.
but to the reality of life. And
But
so
to your point, to that innocence and just that, again, not the ignorance, but the innocence and just that pure belief that Jesus got to, that Paul's getting to, and then the distinction there. It's it's not stuck in this ignorant, just like believe whatever you want to believe and don't have knowledge. And then again, Paul's point with knowledge isn't just facts, right? Even in Ephesians 3, like verse 19, he's talking about this like intimate knowing of Jesus, and so we have
Right.
these. We have an understanding, but we have this relationship, and then we grow in that and move through that.
Yes. And so that we mature in our faith in the areas, but yet we remain childlike in the sense of our faith is solid on who Christ is. But Paul gets real clear. He says, "Are you stealing? Are you a thief? Stop it." That's it. Like, stop it, because that's not who God is. And so as a child of light, as an imitator of God, as someone who has been redeemed and restored, be like Jesus. Because it's not loving your neighbor if you're stealing from your neighbor. And so he just real clearly and real plainly, grow up. Time to stop. Do you got unwholesome talk coming out of your mouth? You making coarse jokes? You engaging in like wrong talk? Stop it. And replace the thing coming out of your mouth with good stuff, encouraging things, helpful for building others up. And today in our culture, what we'd say is like, are you stealing? Are you a thief? Stop stealing. Like, well, let me tell you my story. So I have some childhood and my trauma, and we didn't have a lot growing up, and so that's just what I knew. And so here's my justification, and here's my reasoning. And culturally nowadays, and what really is stealing is the government actually doing well with the finances, so I shouldn't probably pay my taxes because they're not being responsible for it, so I should probably withhold and cheat on my taxes because I'm justified with that. This is how we live in our culture, and God would say to us, grow up. Stop stealing. Pay your taxes. Well, use your voting power to help hopefully invoke some change. But saying, oh, this is just, people know I love them because I cut them down. That's how I joke with them. You're on my inside circle. This is an area for me that I've had to mature and keep trying to mature, is to tame my tongue, that it doesn't become immature by like, oh, I can make a quick jab at you, cut you down so that Kyle will laugh and I'll feel better about myself, but you feel horrible as we leave our interaction today. Jesus would say, grow up. Stop doing that. Use your tongue, your words to encourage one another. Speak life. Be prophetic. We talked about that last episode. Like, grow up. Stop it. Don't do it. Well, that's just how I do it. No, stop it.
So earlier you were trying to get me to share some area where I'm maturing. And I actually was, in the last several minutes, practicing what I am maturing in, and that is getting better at listening. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a talker. Talking comes easy. Listening is another whole conversation altogether. James chapter 1, verse 19, be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to anger. And I'm often just the opposite. And just a few days ago, in a conversation with my wife, with Cindy, I got that pointed out, that I wasn't really listening, and I was talking and not hearing what it was that she was really trying to say. And so, it's a lifelong process, but that's one area that I have gotten better at than I used to be as I've gotten older. Another area of maturity for me has to do with what we're talking about here in Ephesians chapter 4, and realizing that this whole thing, my whole life and my whole relationship with God, is Jesus's doing. Mm-hmm. I've heard people, in years past, when I was more your guys' age, I'd hear people that were my age say, yeah, the older I get, the more I realize the whole thing is all Jesus, and I know that in me, and they'd quote Paul, in my flesh there dwells no good thing, that I'm in Christ and Christ is in me, and that's my hope of glory. And, they would emphasize that. And I would think, well, that's just what old people do because they want to encourage us young people not to get, too full of ourselves. But it's really something that happens as you get along in years. You realize, you look back on the whole experience of walking with Christ, in my case for decades, and realize this whole thing has been him all along, more than I even realized at the time.
Yeah. This is in chapter 5, verse 10, but it's, for me, it's that same tone. Find out what pleases the Lord, or diligently, carefully think about what pleases the Lord, the way I live and my heart attitude. I think the core of the maturing process is to get over myself. And like you were saying, Craig, like this is all about Jesus, for Jesus, by Jesus. We're created by Jesus, by God, in his image, to imitate him in his world, to take care of his stuff, to reflect his glory, to make his name famous. Like it's about him. And so in the maturing process, that's why Paul in 22, verse 22 here of chapter 4, he's like, hey, you used to live a former life. Throw that off. That's the old self. Mature. Stop doing that stuff. Don't be that person. We see the difference. As a Jesus follower, if you're coming to Christ, if you're new in Christ, like the old way we used to think and live, people that live that way, their minds are shut off. Their minds are dark to who God is. Their heart is hard, and we all were that way at one point in our lives. And it's only through the grace of God that we have life in Jesus and understanding in our minds and a heart that is soft. And they would, he goes on, he says, they paints a picture of living a life of lust and sensuality and indulging in the self, whatever feels good in the moment, go for that. But that's a life that leads to death and destruction and chaos. And he said, however, we've all come out of that because of Christ, so let's live as children of the light, throw off the old self, get over ourselves in such a good way, such a healthy way, that we can think about and live life on what pleases the Lord. Kyle?
That's good.
So good. There's just so much there, and I know
Right.
you kind of unpacked, I think, all of it. Right? It is this living. Again, Paul does this pretty cool thing in the middle of the chapter here, where he sets this up, and then he really deliberate in what this looks like. Right? He did that at the beginning of chapter 4. I spent 3 chapters setting up justification and righteousness in life with Christ and what that looks like, and summarizing life with Christ. And now I'm going to get really specific. And so then he sets that up, and then he gets like detailed every dot, right? And this is what it looks like, and because he even sets up the almost the negative part first, right? Having lost all sensitivity, having given yourself over, having hardened your heart, having being lost. Like he paints this picture again of like this extreme of like, you don't want that. You really don't. It's separate from God, therefore it's separate from the life of God, it's separate from the blessings of God, from the power of God. And so live into this, because this is the thing that's beautiful, and it's what you want. It's how God created you, it's what God created you for. So we should strive for that, again, in maturity and in unity.
It does say here that God gave apostles, prophets.
Where are you at?
I'm in Ephesians 4, verse 12. The reason he gave evangelists, pastors, teachers, etc., is to equip his people for works of service, or the work of ministry is really what's in view there, so that the body of Christ may be built up. And then it says, until we all reach unity in the faith. And I made this point in our last podcast, and I want to make it again because I think it's very important. Unity in the faith is not something we achieve. It's something we embrace. We build up the body of Christ and until we all reach unity in the faith, meaning until we all get it. Because the unity that we have is Jesus' doing. We're unified in him. We're unified in the common grace that he's bestowed on each of us. It's all his doing. We don't have to somehow achieve it or organize the body of Christ or, try harder to, corral everybody and put our arms around the whole body. No, he's already done that. And our job, and part of the maturing process, is realizing that. That person in that other church or that other denomination or in that other culture who is a Christ follower, that's my brother, that's my sister. And part of the maturing process is not only realizing that intellectually, but accepting that from the heart. And that's where unity comes, is embracing the unity that is already reality from God's perspective.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just saying in all of these things, and we're kind of hitting some of the details, whether it's put off lines, speak truthfully, don't steal, but give. The way of Jesus is countercultural in the way of, a lot of times we hear, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. But always with Jesus, there's a don't do that so that you can do this. So don't use your mouth to speak lie and tear down. Use it to build up and encourage. Don't use your hands, your physical body to steal from people, but use it to work hard so that you can give to people. If we just focus on stop doing stuff, man, our attention and our focus is going to be on the thing we're supposed to stop doing, and we're just going to do that. You know what I mean? There's only so much willpower. Like, that's what got me sparked, Craig, with this is the reality. Is the Spirit of God in us is a truth teller. The Spirit of God in us is a giver. The Spirit of God in us is compassionate and merciful. So we just need to lean into that and let the Spirit of God direct our steps and feed the appetite of our new self and our spiritual self, not have a desire for continual lust for the old life and desire for that. So anytime you're trying in your life, real practically, if you're trying to stop, focus in on what you should be doing, not just what you shouldn't be doing. Hey, I want to stop lying. Okay, so don't just roll around and say, stop lying, stop lying, stop lying. Say, I'm going to speak the truth in this situation. I'm going to use my words to build up. How do I encourage Kyle and Craig in this moment. And you start practicing that and focusing on that. That'll keep your attention on the right thing and on Jesus.
That's good.
And again, he's setting that up, verse 22 and verse 23, right? Put off the old self, get rid of this, and do this. And he does this a lot. Paul likes this like clothing imagery or putting on imagery. He's like the only guy who uses this language.
Do you think he had a good fit all the time, or desired a better fit?
Stylish kind of dude, right? Was into the Gucci and the Prada back in the day.
The robes of the day.
Yeah. Because he uses it frequently in a lot of his letters, right? Clothe yourself with this. Put on your new life. And so, but I love that what he does there. So, hey, get rid of this, verse 22 and 23. Throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitude, and then put on your new nature. And I love this, the to be made new. It's one of those cool present infinitives, kind of like be being filled, right?
Present infinitives?
Yeah.
Look at you with the grammar.
Fancy. Like be being filled, right? It's not just like this is something, and to your point when you set it up, Scott, and asked us all these questions, this isn't something you just do and then you're done, right? Take it off, put it on, go. This is something you are continually doing as you're seeking through a relationship with Jesus. It's daily being filled with his Spirit. Again, Scott, to your point, hey, I'm going to get rid of that old, but I'm going to focus on God. Would you fill me with your Spirit today? Would you give me words to say to people? Would you show up in these ways of which I can follow after your Spirit, not just like, oh, I don't want to sin, I don't want to sin, I don't want to sin. No, God, I want to be used by you. I want your Spirit to lead me today. I want you to, guide my conversations and my thoughts and my actions and my attitudes, instead of just being like, again, think about it with any addiction. Any addiction is not going to be cured just by like, oh, I don't want to do it, 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 I don't want to do it. There's a lot more there. And so it's focusing on what do I want to do? Who do I want to be? Why do I have to have a reason I want my relationships to be better, and I want to love people better, and I want to be there for my kids in the future. Like anybody who's ever gone through any sort of addiction will tell you that's what's going to get you out of it, not just stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that.
And ultimately go what pleases God, and I'm going to be with him forever. So to even look way down the road on that, like I enjoy a good donut. I really do. Fresh donuts, donut places. But if I just go, don't eat donuts, don't eat donuts, don't eat donuts. I mean, I can walk through the bakery department and be like, oh, those are pretty good. And then you walk through like the white boxes with the 6-pack and you get the old fat. I'm like, oh, those look pretty good. Like if I'm like, don't eat donuts, don't eat donuts, don't eat donuts. It's a bad day for Scott because I'm going to be eating some donuts for sure at some
some
point.
pumpkin spice ones back in the bakery.
Dude, I had to walk by those like 20 times. I'm like, good thing I don't really like pumpkin spice. Okay. So yeah. But if I'm like, okay, I'm gonna when I go home, I'm not gonna reach for a donut because the donuts are still at the store because that's where I left them because that's where I can have self-control. I'm gonna go, what fruit or vegetable can I eat? Because my kids eat like kids, and I'm like, I should just eat with them. I'm 45. I can't keep eating with them. It catches up way too quick. So before we land the plane here, here's a little tricky thing. Pastors, help us out with this. Verse 26, in your anger, do not sin. Don't let the sun go down while you're angry. Okay, so here's anger. It's one of those things like let's mature, let's grow up as people. We all struggle with anger. But in your anger, do not sin. God has a righteous anger. Jesus seems like he got angry at times, but he didn't sin. And then hop down a couple more verses. Verse 31, get rid of all, and there's a list there, and including anger. So anger is one of those things for all of us could mature. Some people more so than others, but all of us can mature in growing up. Is anger in itself sinful? Is the anger that leads to sin? Because it gives the devil a foothold in that. So am I setting the table well enough here for us to jump in? Are we supposed to get rid of all anger or some anger good? Do we just call it a different term called passion? Or like, I'm really moved by this, and so it's not anger, but I'm really passionate, but it kind of looks like anger. What do we do with that, and how do we mature in that area?
I think there's a little bit of a hint in verse 26. In the NLT, it says, New Living Translation says, and don't sin by letting anger control you. That's when anger starts producing sin. The capacity for anger, the emotion of anger, is not sinful in and of itself. It's a God-given capability. That's part of how we are created in his image. But when anger starts to control us, that's when sin starts to come along. And this, by the way, it says, don't let the sun go down while you are still angry. It's a reference. It's a metaphor. It's a reference to deal with it sooner, not later. I've heard some horror stories of some people that took that so literally. They get in an argument with their wife, around dinner time, and it's like one of them insists that we got to get this settled or we can't go to sleep, and they're up until 2 a.m. and they only argue worse and worse and say things they regret and hurt each other with their words. No. By the way, usually when that happens, the sun's already gone down.
So,
but the
game
idea
over.
is just don't let your anger simmer.
Yeah, because it just develops bitterness in our heart and resentment.
Yeah, all
deal
kinds
with
of
it.
other bad
deal
stuff.
with it, specifically relationally. Deal with it. Don't harbor a grudge. All that kind of stuff.
Because you know what kids do? Get angry, act out, and then stuff it, move along. You know what adults do? Work through your emotions, and then at the appropriate time, sooner than later, address it in a calm, healthy way, thinking about the other person's interests above your own, even in conflict. So anger, help us
I'll
out.
ask you. I've spoke quite a few messages on this because I think this is a tricky thing. Because if you look at the biblical narrative as a whole, right? Paul's not the only one who talked about this. Jesus said, "Anyone who is angry with his brother, right, is subject to judgment." James says, "Man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires." Right? We see this all the time. I think the biggest distinction here, specifically when we equate it to God's anger and God's righteous anger, we think that when we're angry, it's a righteous anger, and we're like, I have a right to be angry because I'm.
Well, that's because it is.
Yeah,
It is
obviously.
justified.
And
Every time I'm angry, at least.
and
I
then
don't know about
everybody
you.
else is just having a hot temper and being.
And that's a more interpersonal thing because, the tricky nuance is like I get angry when I see some injustice and there's oppression of people, poverty, things that just should not be in the world. Yep. And is it anger or is it just fired upness, passion? I'm like, that is not right. And I get motivated in a good way to good actions. That's part of
where we feel. But I think a lot of times, and I've said this before, I think a lot of times we think anger is a good motivator. I think anger is a bad motivator. I think we should be acting out of love, out of compassion, out of this sense for justice and all that kind of stuff. But when we do it with anger as the motivator, we're going to do it in a way that's angry and rude and hurtful. I think we can have this feeling, but acting out of anger is, again, that's where it's going to go. Oh, I can't go let the sun go down. So we just let the anger control our thoughts, control our words. And we, again, anger is a bad motivator. It's hot-headed. It's this hot temper. It's where we blow our top instead of slowing down and letting love be our motivator. Like, there's something in me that doesn't like to see the injustices of this world. There's something, the way that God built us, like we shouldn't just be okay with hurt and pain. But acting out of anger, I think, that's where he says anger is now the thing that is controlling you. Right. It is the thing that is in control, where you should let the Spirit of God and His love in you be the thing that controls you. Yeah,
good point. Excellent. Yeah, and Paul will get there here in like the next chapter, but alcohol. Saying alcohol in and of itself is not bad, not sinful, but being controlled by it, a.k.a. drunk, and you're out of your own control and you do things and say things and buy things you wouldn't normally in your right mind because you're not being controlled by you. Yeah. You're being controlled by the substance. So same
again,
with
he
anger.
just does such a good job of using that as an analogy for just how we do our life. What is it that's controlling you? Is it our lustful desires? We're just being controlled by pleasing our flesh, by making ourselves happy, by satisfying ourselves. Again, use the donut illustration, but with anything, right? Like we're just doing this because I want to feel good. I want to numb my pains with alcohol or drugs or food, or numb myself with hours and hours of TV or video games, whatever it is. Like, what is that thing that's controlling you? What is that thing that's influencing you? What are you under the influence of? And he says the best option is the Spirit of God. That to your point, Scott, as I'm mature, I want to be someone who's like, I want nothing more than just to be with Jesus. I want nothing more than to be controlled by Jesus, right? Instead of in all of our lives, there's that thing like I want nothing more than to be controlled by the food I eat, the entertainment I watch, the drink I have at 5 o'clock when I get home, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to circle back around before we are done here today. Just real briefly, just in the last few minutes, we've talked about what it means to follow Christ in a way that suggests, I suspect, to maybe some of our listeners, that they're hearing us say that walking with Jesus is about do's and don'ts. Don't do this, do that. Don't do that, do this. And I think at least I have in years past, said, no, it's not about a list of do's and don'ts. I mean, that's one of the big complaints you get from people who are on the outside of what it means to be a Christ follower. They don't understand. They maybe haven't read the Bible much. And their perception is it's just a bunch of rules. And what we're talking about is not what they're referring to when they raise that objection. It's not about keeping the rules in order to have a relationship with God. It's because I have a relationship with God that there are some things that I don't do and there are some things I do. And those do's and don'ts aren't a mechanism by which we gain favor with God or achieve right standing. It's impossible for us to do it that way. We receive right standing and are justified by grace through faith. It's a gift from God because we never could earn it. It's not earnable. We aren't good enough. We would never achieve that. But now that we have that great standing, we want to live in a way that's pleasing, and that involves some do's and don'ts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we live from righteousness that we've been talking about previous episodes. Read Ephesians. We live from righteousness because of Christ's work. We don't live for righteousness in our morality, is what you're saying there. Absolutely. That's a good point because we're to live a life of love. And if we can land the plane here on that note is we mature because it's not about us maturing. It's about us doing the things that love God and please Him and that love the people around us, which is loving God. Love God, love people. And it always comes back to that. And so we are to be imitators of God who is love and live a life of love so that He's pleased and the world that He created and the people He created are together, supporting each other, caring for one another, everybody doing their special part to build the body up, and we live within the unity that does exist. Because one day there's going to be a perfect garden city that we're all going to be in with God Himself, ruling and reigning with Him, and however that lives and works, we just know it's perfect and beautiful. So let's practice that now. Let's be people who bring that future, pull it back into the present now. And when we live and pray, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, it's that reality being pulled in these ways of forgiveness and giving and compassion and mercy and using our words to build up and all the stuff we've talked about today so that we could be people who love God and love the people around us well. All right.
Amen.
Good deal. Thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. Have a fabulous week following Jesus and living like Him.